I gave my daughter a house as a wedding gift, believing her marriage would be something to celebrate, elegant, joyful, and everything a mother could wish for. But before the wedding even took place, that so-called son-in-law arrived with his entire family, his parents, brother, and sister-in-law, all acting like they owned the place. The first words out of their mouths, they claimed the master bedroom for themselves and expected my daughter to handle all the chores. I thought she was entering a marriage, but they saw her as nothing more than a live-in maid. What they didn't see coming was how quickly they overplayed their hand. They got comfortable too soon and only realized too late that my daughter was no pushover. And, in the very next breath, I made sure every last one of them learned their place. Curtis Miller, my daughter's boyfriend, had always seemed like a decent guy, polite, attentive, and the kind of man any cautious parent might approve of. But his family was another story. No house, no car, and not a single financial contribution to the wedding. His parents lived in a remote town, working as farmhands, while his brother and sister-in-law barely scraped by with odd jobs in the city. My husband Thomas and I had concerns about this relationship from the start, but Natalie was in love, deeply, stubbornly, hopelessly in love. She pleaded, coaxed, and insisted until we finally gave in. Wanting to ensure she wouldn't struggle after marriage, we gifted her a beautiful house in the Boston suburbs, a fully renovated standalone home with every detail handpicked. Thomas had personally overseen everything, pouring hundreds of thousands into custom designs and the finest contractors. The day renovations were completed, he was so excited he dragged me to see the final result. But before we even stepped inside, an unmistakable, shrill voice rang through the house. "Oh, is this neighborhood a prison? Every house has its doors shut. How am I supposed to visit the neighbors if no one leaves their doors open?" Then she continued, criticizing the front gate, calling it a fortress, and demanding Curtis hire workers to tear it down. I didn't need to see her to know it was Curtis's mother, Mrs. Miller. A slow anger built inside me. Curtis had brought nothing to this marriage. Not a home, not a car, not even an engagement ring. Natalie had quietly bought one herself, pretending it was from him to keep us from worrying. When we later found out, we let it go, thinking at least they loved each other. But when his parents learned about the ring, instead of showing gratitude or embarrassment, they scoffed, calling it wasteful and unnecessary. And now, standing at the doorstep of the house we had gifted our daughter, hearing this woman complain like she was inspecting a rundown motel, my patience wore thin. Natalie, ever the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over, suggesting they visit the community center for social events. But Mrs. Miller wrinkled her nose in distaste. Then, as if we were invisible, Curtis's parents wandered off, inspecting rooms and furniture as if they already owned the place. Not a word of greeting, not even a glance in our direction. Even Thomas, usually the calmer one, looked completely caught off guard. Seeing my darkening expression, Curtis rushed over, whispering, "Mr. Dawson, Mrs. Dawson, my parents are just loud. But I promise, they really do love Natalie." Before I could respond, a loud laugh echoed from the master bedroom. "Now this is a damn fine room," Mr. Miller's voice rang out. For a second, I thought they were finally appreciating what we had done for Natalie. Then I stepped inside, and my breath caught in my throat. Mrs. Miller was sprawled across the brand-new bed, like she owned it, shoes still on, dirt from her worn-out sneakers already staining the fresh sheets. Next to her, Mr. Miller lit a cigarette inside my daughter's new home. Before I could speak, he pressed the burning tip against the solid wood nightstand, leaving behind a dark charred mark. Thomas clenched his jaw so tightly I thought he might crack a tooth. Natalie, visibly embarrassed, nudged Curtis, silently begging him to step in. But he only lowered his head, hunched his shoulders, and stayed silent, like a scolded child. Then, as if their audacity hadn't already peaked, Mr. Miller stretched, sighed contentedly, and said, "This room is perfect. We'll take this one." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. But no, they had just walked into my daughter's home, taken one look around, and decided to claim the master bedroom. The three of us, Thomas, Natalie, and I, stood frozen in disbelief. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an invasion. Mr. Miller casually strolled out, inspecting another room before nodding in satisfaction. "This one's perfect for our grandson," he declared, turning to Curtis. "Call your brother. Tell him to cancel his lease. He and Jenna should move in right away." Then, as if the decision was already made, he continued, "We'll put the house in Travis's name, so Luca has a stable home for school. As for you and Natalie, you can move back in once you have kids." I felt my patience snap. Before I could speak, Thomas gave my wrist a small shake, silently asking me to hold back. He wanted to see if Natalie could stand up for herself. If she couldn't set boundaries now, what kind of future would she have with this family? I exhaled sharply and turned to Curtis, the boy who had always seemed respectful, well-mannered, and proper, now standing with his head down, silent, a puppet without strings. But Natalie had reached her limit. Her voice turned cold. "This house was a gift from my parents. It's not a boarding house for your entire family. Don't you think you're crossing the line?" The room tensed. Mr. Miller's expression darkened, a puff of smoke escaping his nostrils. His voice was sharp. "Your house," he sneered. "You really think this place belongs to you? This is my son's home, which means it's our home." His lip curled. "And you have the nerve to talk back to your future father-in-law before you're even married." He scanned the room and scoffed. "Travis is wasting money on rent when this house is huge. Why shouldn't he move in?" Mrs. Miller immediately chimed in, her voice shrill. "I get it. It's your wedding house. But be honest. 2 people living in a whole mansion? It's ridiculous. What's the big deal if Luca stays here? You don't even have kids yet. Why let a perfectly good room go to waste?" Then, as if they were being generous instead of entitled, she added, "We're not trying to take advantage of you, sweetie. We just don't want you struggling alone. We came here to help, to support you. You should be grateful." Her tone suddenly shifted, a smirk appearing. "Besides, you're about to be my daughter-in-law. It's only right you take care of us. Cooking, cleaning. Don't think you can slack off just because you're the bride." Natalie's hands trembled at her sides, her breath sharp and fast. But Mrs. Miller wasn't finished. "Honestly, looking at you, I can tell you're not much of a housekeeper. Why don't you save yourself the trouble and have your father hire a maid to take care of us instead?" That was it, Natalie snapped. "If you want a house in the city, if you want to be taken care of, pay for it yourselves. Stop expecting my parents to hand you everything." Silence fell over the room. Mrs. Miller's face twisted in rage. "Curtis, are you hearing this? This is the woman you're about to marry, talking like we're beggars." She turned to her son. "Since when did her family's money become more important than ours?" Curtis's face paled. "Natalie, you can't say things like that. apologize to my parents." Natalie's gaze hardened. Her voice was like steel. "Curtis, if you actually believe that, take your parents and get out of my house." Curtis panicked, grabbing her wrist and pleading for her to listen, but she yanked her arm away, as if his touch burned her. Mr. Miller scoffed, mocking Curtis for his inability to control her, warning that if he let this go, she'd walk all over him forever. His sneering tone pushed me over the edge. I grabbed a glass from the table and shattered it against the floor. The house fell into stunned silence before Thomas exploded in fury, throwing a punch that sent Mr. Miller crashing into the wall, gasping for breath as a dark bruise formed on his face. Mrs. Miller shrieked, calling Thomas crazy, but he loomed over Mr. Miller with a deadly warning. Curtis, frozen in place, tried to justify his actions, saying he only spoke harshly because she had disrespected his parents. Before he could finish, Thomas struck him hard, sending him stumbling backward, a bright red handprint blooming on his cheek. Furious, Thomas growled that it was for Natalie and every insult Curtis had allowed against her. Curtis scrambled backward, panicked, while Mr. Miller, still dazed, threatened to call the cops. Thomas grabbed him by the collar, lifted him effortlessly, and silenced him with a sharp, menacing voice, declaring that Natalie was too good for their family. He accused them of bringing nothing but disrespect into their home, making it clear they would receive nothing. Mr. Miller, trembling, quickly nodded, grabbing his shoe as Thomas kicked it toward him. Mrs. Miller yanked Curtis toward the door, but couldn't resist a final jab, boasting that girls would line up for him while Natalie would end up alone. As they rushed down the steps, one of them tripped, sending all three tumbling down the front stairs in a mess of flailing limbs. Watching them groan on the pavement, Thomas shook his head, muttering that they got what they deserved. Later that evening, when Natalie returned from work, she was visibly upset. Without a word, she handed me her phone. Curtis had emailed her. Despite being blocked everywhere, he had found another way to reach her. The email was absurd. He demanded she pay him back for every expense he had ever covered during their relationship, listing items like coffee, Uber rides, and dinners, totaling $2,897.36. The sheer audacity was infuriating, especially since Natalie had often paid for their outings, even buying him an expensive phone for his birthday, while receiving only a gift card in return. His attempt to guilt her into repayment was pathetic, but what made it worse was the veiled threat at the end. If she didn't pay, he would confront her at work. The next morning, as we arrived at her office, a commotion had already formed. Curtis and his parents were at the entrance, loudly demanding to see a manager, claiming Natalie owed him money. Employees whispered in confusion as Mrs. Miller put on a dramatic performance, painting Natalie as a gold digger who had used her son. When I stepped forward, their arrogance faltered, but Mrs. Miller doubled down, boldly declaring the amount owed. The room fell silent, then erupted into laughter. Less than $3,000? The ridiculousness of the situation was impossible to ignore. Mr. Miller, desperate to regain control, pulled out a poster board detailing every single expense Curtis had supposedly covered. As he read them aloud, the mockery only grew. Keeping a record of coffee dates and flowers, it was beyond petty. When Curtis mumbled that it was for financial planning, the laughter intensified. I took my chance, pulling out my checkbook. With deliberate slowness, I wrote a check for $3,000 and tossed it at Curtis's feet. The room gasped. Mrs. Miller snatched it up, looking triumphant, until I smirked. Since we were settling debts, I announced, It was only fair that Curtis repay what he owed Natalie. His face went pale as I listed the gifts and support she had provided, amounting to far more than what he demanded. The crowd erupted in agreement, exposing the Millers' hypocrisy. Mrs. Miller shrieked in denial, but Natalie had had enough. With icy determination, she suggested taking this spectacle to Curtis's office, letting his colleagues witness his shame. His face drained of color. Desperate, Mrs. Miller lashed out, aiming to slap Natalie. But I was faster, stepping in with a calm but firm warning. The room fell into a chilling silence. I turned to Curtis, making it clear that their attempt to humiliate Natalie had only destroyed their own reputation. With that, we walked away, heading straight to management to handle things professionally. The supervisor, initially confused, quickly changed his tone upon realizing who I was. Skimming through Curtis's email, he frowned deeply. An assistant whispered in his ear, and his demeanor shifted instantly. Recognizing my connection to a major company, he became formally apologetic and assured us the matter would be handled seriously. Then, his expression hardened as he turned to Curtis, voice laced with disappointment. Keeping track of personal expenses and demanding repayment was not only unprofessional, but outright disgraceful. Curtis's downfall was inevitable. After his public outburst and reckless behavior, his once arrogant demeanor crumbled. His supervisor's reprimand left him speechless, and the consequences were set in motion. I thanked the supervisor and turned to leave with Natalie. But just as we were about to go, Mrs. Miller's voice cut through the air. I didn't need to argue. Everyone already knew who had won. In the weeks that followed, Natalie gradually returned to her routine. Work, coffee dates, yoga sessions. Thomas and I avoided mentioning Curtis, not wanting to reopen old wounds. Then, one evening, she walked in, her expression uneasy. Without a word, she handed me her phone. Another message from an unknown number, but the words were unmistakable. Curtis, apologizing, begging, trying to manipulate his way back. "This is the third one," she murmured. She hadn't responded. "Good," I said. Silence spoke louder than any reply. But Curtis wasn't ready to let go. Soon after, an anonymous social media post surfaced, filled with twisted narratives, edited clips, and vicious accusations aimed at Natalie. The source was obvious. "Do we even need to guess who did this?" I asked. She exhaled, exhausted. "Why can't he just let me go?" The answer was simple. It wasn't her he was holding on to. It was his own ego. That night, I reached out to a legal contact, and by morning, we had issued a notice demanding the content be removed and the account traced. A harassment report was filed. For the moment, things calmed, but Curtis still wasn't done. A week later, a package arrived. Inside was a handwritten letter from him, full of nostalgia and regret. He painted their past in golden hues, recalling their best moments. But then, at the end, his true intention was clear. "I have nothing left. If you don't come back, I don't know what I might do." This wasn't an apology. It was emotional blackmail. Without hesitation, I called our lawyer and started the process for a restraining order. That afternoon, Natalie and I sat in the courthouse. She gripped the letter tightly, frustration in her voice. "I know I'm doing the right thing, but why does it still feel so exhausting?" I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because healing takes time, but you're doing everything right." A few weeks later, the restraining order was granted. Curtis was legally barred from contacting her. We also ensured Granite and Company's legal team had everything on record. This time, we weren't waiting for apologies or empty promises. Natalie had broken free. She was no longer the woman who tiptoed around someone else's emotions or sacrificed her happiness for someone who refused to change. She poured herself into her work, excelling under pressure. And then came the turning point, the regional business conference. Granite and Company selected Natalie to represent them at a major industry event. She stood on stage, confident and composed, delivering a presentation that captured the attention of executives and investors. By the end, professionals from across the country were eager to connect. That event subtly, but permanently, altered the trajectory of her career. At a networking luncheon afterward, she met Ethan Parker. He was intelligent, composed, and free of arrogance despite his background. Their first conversation was brief. No forced small talk, no immediate exchange of numbers. But a week later, a letter arrived. A handwritten note from Ethan. Not a grand gesture, just a thoughtful message recognizing her work, accompanied by a book he thought she'd appreciate. I smirked. At least this one didn't send you an invoice after the breakup. She laughed, but said nothing. There were no rushed pursuits. Over time, they built a natural connection through shared professional interests. Then, one evening, as Ethan drove her home, he pulled over and spoke with quiet sincerity. I don't know how you feel about me, but I want you to know I like you, not because of your work or your brilliance, but because when I'm with you, life feels like something worth experiencing fully. Natalie hesitated, then admitted, I don't know what the future holds, but I'd like to find out. For the first time, she entered a relationship without fear, without hesitation. Ethan soon introduced her to his parents, who welcomed her with warmth and respect. Nothing like Curtis's family. At dinner, his mother prepared dessert herself, smiling as she said, Ethan has never brought anyone home before. I had to make sure I did this right. Later, his father quietly told Thomas, she's remarkable, intelligent, poised, and independent. We're glad he met someone like her. There was no pressure, no demands, just genuine acceptance. But good things don't go unnoticed. A candid photo of Natalie and Ethan at a business event surfaced online, and it wasn't long before the news reached Curtis. That evening, as she left the office, she found him waiting. His face was pale, eyes dark with resentment. So this is it? He sneered. You left me and ran straight into another man's arms? She met his gaze, unshaken. You have no right to question me, Curtis. Walk away. His voice turned sharp. You were already with him when we were together, weren't you? Her tone hardened. I have a restraining order against you. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. Curtis clenched his fists, his anger bubbling to the surface. But before he could respond, another presence stepped forward. Ethan. He was calm, his voice steady. I don't know who you are, but if you take another step toward her, I'll call the police myself. Curtis faltered. He hadn't expected this. You think you're better than me? He spat. Ethan remained composed. It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that she is no longer someone you can hurt. There was no shouting, no dramatic fight, just a quiet, undeniable truth that left Curtis standing there, powerless. Natalie had moved beyond his reach. As she and Ethan walked away, Curtis stood frozen, drowning in his own anger and regret. But the world had moved on, and Natalie never looked back. That evening, we took a slow walk by the lake, a place we had visited countless times before. She gazed at the water and suddenly said, Do you remember how I used to collect stones? I thought every single one was worth keeping. I smiled. You always said each one was special. She let out a soft laugh. Now I realize some things are meant to stay in your heart, not in your life. She had changed. She no longer clung to what was broken. She had learned to stand on her own. "What do you think people spend their whole lives chasing?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "Peace," I answered. "Not happiness?" she asked. I shook my head. "Happiness is fleeting, sometimes just someone else's expectations. But peace, that's something you build for yourself." She was quiet, absorbing the words. Then, with newfound certainty, she said, "I used to think I needed to be loved by someone else to feel like my life had meaning. But no, learning to love myself is enough." I nodded. "That's more than enough." And as we walked along the lake's edge, I realized she no longer needed me to guide her. She could walk on her own, but every now and then she still chose to reach for my hand, and that was enough.